You've probably heard that neural networks are like artificial brains. But what if that's kind of wrong? Today, we're going to ditch that idea and look at them for what they really are: elegant, geometric machines. And their main job? It's surprisingly simple. It's all about slicing up data. Let's get into it. So, seriously, what is actually happening in there? When a network learns to spot the difference between a cat and a dog, is it thinking? Well, it turns out that whole brain metaphor can be more confusing than helpful. We're about to unpack a much simpler and, honestly, way more powerful idea. All right, so here's the main idea for this whole explainer. Neural networks don't think, they slice. Just imagine all of your data. Every single picture of a cat and a dog you have is all jumbled together in one big space. The network's only job is to draw lines, or cuts, to separate them into a cat pile and a dog pile. That's it. At its heart, it's a system for partitioning data. So really, we just need to shift our perspective. We're moving away from the squishy world of biology and into the clean, crisp world of geometry. And you'll see, once we start thinking about neural networks as geometric machines, how they work and why they work so well suddenly starts to make a whole lot of sense. Okay, to get the geometry, you first have to picture the landscape. In machine learning, this is called the input space. The best way to think about it is like a giant detailed map. Every single piece of data you could ever show the network, every possible cat photo, every dog photo, even just random static, has its own unique coordinate, its own specific spot on this map. All right, let's start with the most basic case, just to build this up from the ground floor. What can a neural network with just a single layer of neurons actually do? This is what we call a shallow network. It's the most basic version you can get. And its method for carving up that big data map is pretty straightforward, but also, as you'll see, very limited. So the tool it uses is called a hyperplane. Now, don't let that fancy name scare you. A hyperplane is just a perfectly straight cut. That's it. If our data map was a 2D piece of paper, a hyperplane is just a line. If the map was a 3D block, the hyperplane is a flat sheet cutting through it. It's the simplest possible way to divide a space. So a shallow network looks at this map of all its data, and its entire strategy, all it can do is just draw a bunch of these straight lines, these hyperplanes, to try and fence off the cats from the dogs. It can add more lines, sure, but they're always straight, and it's always cutting that original flat map. Okay, but this is where it gets really clever. This is the big aha moment that explains why adding more layers, making the network deep, is so incredibly powerful. It's not about just adding more and more cuts. It's something much smarter. This quote from the research paper is really the key. When it says the network can map portions to the same output, it's describing an amazing trick. It means the network learns how to take completely separate regions of our data map and basically stack them all on top of each other so it can deal with them all at once. This is the big idea, folding. And this is the core trick right here. Instead of just adding more and more straight lines to the original flat map, a deep network does something more like origami. Each layer folds the data map before the next layer makes its cut. So let's just walk through that. You start with the map. Then, the first layer takes a bunch of different sections and literally folds them right on top of each other. Now, the next layer doesn't need to make a whole bunch of cuts in different places. It can make one single, simple, straight cut that slices through all those folded up regions at the exact same time. Now look at this. This diagram from the paper shows you exactly how it works. On the left, you've got the original grid with 4 separate regions, right? S1, S2, S3, and S4. Now look what happens on the right after just one layer. The network has learned to fold all 4 of those separate quadrants onto the exact same spot. This is the magic trick. Now, a single simple cut in that one little area can separate data in all 4 of the original regions at once. It's just an incredibly efficient way to reuse one simple calculation. So, what's the big deal with all this folding? Well, the result is massive. This is the real reason why adding layers to make a network deeper is so much more powerful than just adding more neurons to make a single layer wider. Let's just put them side by side. If you have the same number of neurons to work with, a shallow network just keeps adding more straight cuts. The number of new regions it can create grows at a steady, predictable rate, what mathematicians call polynomial growth. But a deep network, by folding the space and reusing its cuts, the number of regions it can create grows exponentially. That's the word, that's the whole game. With each new layer, the number of distinct regions the network can define just explodes. It's not just adding to its power, it's multiplying it. And the researchers themselves put it perfectly in their abstract. That compositional structure, that's just a fancy way of saying the layering, the folding. It lets the network reuse pieces of computation. Every single cut made in a later layer is effectively copied and pasted across all the regions that were folded together by the layers before it. And that's where this exponential power comes from. So, all of this geometric theory sounds pretty cool, right? But does it actually make a difference in the real world? Well, let's take a look at the evidence from the paper. Because this ability to create exponentially more regions isn't just some abstract math concept. No, it has a direct, a measurable, and a huge impact on how well a network can actually solve a difficult problem. This one experiment from the paper just makes it crystal clear. The goal here was to separate the data along that wiggly, complicated boundary. So first, look at the shallow network. That's the solid pink line. It's just clunky, right? It can't capture that curve, and it ends up making 123 mistakes. But now, look at the deep network, the dashed blue line. Because it can fold the space, it can create tons of tiny, precise little cuts, which lets it hug that complicated boundary almost perfectly. And the result? Just 24 errors. They both had the same number of neurons to work with, but the deep network's geometric advantage gave it a ridiculously better result. All right, so let's just quickly recap the big ideas. First, stop thinking of neural networks as brains and start thinking of them as geometric slicing machines. A simple, shallow network, it just makes a few straight cuts. But a deep network performs a kind of origami. It folds the data map so it can reuse its cuts over and over again. And that simple trick leads to an exponential explosion in its power. And that kind of leaves us with a really fascinating thought. If this one simple geometric idea, folding, is the secret to so much of their power, it really makes you wonder, what other simple, elegant geometric secrets are still hiding inside the world of AI, just waiting for us to find them?